Welcome to another episode of Mysteries Unknown. I'm really excited about tonight's podcast. I've got a good one for you guys. I've got Dee with me, and Dee had a very scary encounter with Bigfoot in 1997 when he was out hunting with his son. They were out camping and just had a run-in with this creature, but the odd thing about this encounter is 10 years later, almost exactly the same time, he went to the same spot camping with his wife, and they had a really strange encounter with Bigfoot, did a lot of weird things, and this is a really good one, guys, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But before I do, I just want to say thanks for being here. If you have an encounter or a mystery that you would like to talk about, you can send it to me by email at video@jscreativear.com. Let's jump right into the story. Dee, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh. Glad to be here.
Man, I'm excited for you to be here. So why don't you take us back to this very first encounter you had in Oregon? I believe it was in 97, you said, and kind of walk us through that.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to give a little bit of background that, 8 years old, I started hunting with my grandpa. Before that, he took me out to his logging sites all the time as a young child. So growing up, we were hunting, fishing. Grandpa take us out in the woods all the time. So we saw all types of wildlife, cougars, bears, coyotes. At that time, we didn't have wolves here in Oregon, so there wasn't any wolves. And just different noises, sounds, everything. We got well acquainted with the woods, and Grandpa'd take us for walks and tell us everything that's going on. He was a good logger. And what we usually did was me and my son would go everywhere. I took him hunting when he was 3 years old. I packed him on my back. We'd go out and mess around out in the woods, and everybody says, "Well, you're crazy, taking a kid out there." I says, "Well, the only way he's going to learn is if he was with me." And some of the fondest memories I had was with my grandpa. So I wanted to make some memories. But anyhow, that year, my son and I decided to go up early. I have an older brother that was going to meet us up this hunting spot. And it's a hunting spot we hunted at all my life. It's just where we go. And my son and I were up there a day early. So we went up, we drove around, did our thing, looked around, didn't get too excited about anything. And it got about pretty close to 4 in the afternoon, time to stop. So where we camped was in a Y of the road. So you had kind of the main part of the road here and then an offshoot. And right in the center, we set up camp, and that's where we camped every year for deer season and elk season when we got tags. And son and I were just sitting there, and we built a fire and just waiting for my brother. Got out some food and had a little dinner, and we were just sitting there talking, enjoying the nature. But the thing I noticed the most, because I've been out in the woods, we've been out in the woods at night hunting bear, or not hunting bear. I shouldn't say that, because we were actually after cougars, but found more bear than we found cougars. And usually it was chasing with dogs. This has been a while back before that law took place that there was cougar, or you could bear hunt and cougar hunt with dogs. But anyhow, there was always a little bit of noise in the forest of some type. Crickets, something. There was always something, a little noise. This night we sat down and ate and heard nothing. You could have heard a pin drop. Just nothing. The crackle of the fire was about the only thing you could hear. So we were sitting there and we were talking, just having some good conversation. And a ways away is about 8:30, somewhere in there, 8:30, because I kept looking at my watch because waiting for my brother. It's like, God, he should be here. What's going on? And we heard this howl, or it wasn't a howl. It was a scream. Just like you heard on a lot of the Bigfoot shows. It was a scream. Not like, some people say, oh, it sounds like a woman or screaming. And it was a guttural just scream, and it was 3 to 4 or 5 seconds long. And I heard it. It sounded like it was a ways away, but we were sitting where this crossroad is. There's a big draw. So noise just travels up and down that draw. And you can hear it. My son turned around, looked at me, and he says, Dad, he was 9 to 10 years old at that time. And he looks at me, he says, what was that? Well, I was brought up a different way. I just looked at him and says, don't worry about it. Inside, I was going, what was that? Wasn't a cougar, wasn't a bear, wasn't cattle, wasn't anything that I'd ever heard before. So we sat there talking, and he kind of forgot about it. I kind of forgot about it. And it was probably about 2 hours later, somewhere in there, another one. This time, though, the scream was loud, and I'm getting goosebumps even talking about it. It was just, it was a scream that you'll never forget. And still, like I said, I'm goosebumpy because it bothered me, but I didn't show anything because I didn't want my son afraid to go out in the woods. The last thing I wanted was him to be so scared of the woods at dark that he'd never go out again. Because it just was, that was in me. I wanted to raise him to be strong, in any type of circumstances, be strong. Well, I just looked at him. He says, Dad, that was loud. And I says, yeah, it's all right. It's no big deal. We got our rifle with us and we'll be all right. Well, it was pretty close to 11:30, somewhere in there, 12. That thing screamed, and it was just like, oh my God, it's right on top of us. And his eyes were about as big as softballs. I looked at him. I didn't have, I had a little bit of fear, but more curiosity. But I had more fear for my son. Who knows whatever's there, what is it going to do? Hey, it can take me on, but it was my son I was worried about. So I says, let's get in the truck. And he looked at me and he says, Dad, I'm not going to the other side. I says, no, you crawl on the driver's side here. You just get in, lock your door. I kind of chuckled about that because when he looked at me and said that, it was just the fear in his face of, I'm not going to the other side. So we got in the truck, and the way I had the truck parked was the pickup box was towards the main road, or the main road that was kind of goes up there. I forgot to interject this. If I can, I'd like to interject something. We weren't hunting for Bigfoot, and it's in a place that never should have been. We were probably, I don't know, 20 miles out of a small town, 400 people into town. So when I heard the noise and trying to connect with Bigfoot was just kind of like, what in the world? Because this is not a place to see him. But anyhow, so we got in the truck, and I had to turn it around to come back to the road. When I turned it around, I turned the headlights on, turned around, and when I got facing the main road, right across the road, and there was some pine trees, small pine trees, I'd say 12, 15 feet tall. Turn around, I had the headlights on high beam, turned around, and bam, there it was. All you saw was two hands holding the limbs back, or holding the tops of those trees back, peeking over. And now you got to understand, all I saw was from here up of the head. I didn't see a face, but I saw these hands, and that's exactly how they looked, Josh. Just like that. You could see the hands around those limbs holding it apart. And that was, uh, it felt like 15, 20 minutes. I imagine it was only seconds, but it felt like I mean, it felt like forever. I was just, you can see I'm practically shaking now because the thing was so big. The fingers were huge, and it had it open, stayed there, and then let go. Now the tops of the tree, just the tops of the trees were doing this, not the rest of the tree. No wind that night, no nothing. And they were just swaying back and forth. All I did was look at my son. I says, well, I think we better go find a campground. He says, yeah, Dad, hurry up. And we drove off the mountain, and we went into town, and we stayed at one of their campgrounds there in town. We got up the next morning, and I asked him, I said, Tyler, what do you think? And he says, Dad, I don't know. He says, but it was scary. That screaming was loud. And I says, yeah, it was a little too loud. That last one pretty much shook us both up pretty good. So we took off that next day we went up in the woods, and I says, I gotta see these trees. Okay, I've got to get some perspective on how tall we think the creature was. I've been into Bigfoot since I was, gosh, since 1972, when I read my grandpa's wildlife magazine where it had the Patterson Gimlin film discussion in it. But I'd never seen it, never had really too many encounters with it. So we parked a pickup where we were parked that night, and I looked over at the trees, and I says, well, I says, you stay here and let me walk over to the trees, and let's just see where we're at. And when I got to the trees and I looked up, I went, holy crap, that's 10, 15 feet tall. I'm 5'9", and I stretched my arm up, and I still couldn't come close to where the hands were and the top of the head was. So if I had to guess, I'd probably say 12 to 13 feet. And I told my son, I says, well, let's grab the rifle and let's see if we can find some tracks. Now, where I was hunting, it's really dry, and there's dust on the road, but there's not much dust. It's just kind of hard dirt. And where it was standing was that group of trees. Well, behind it is kind of a small opening with grass. So it had grass that was maybe 10 inches tall, just woods grass. And I told my son, I says, well, let's see if we can find some tracks or something. You could see underneath the trees it's matted down, but now there's deer and elk and everything that will lay underneath the trees. So, you can't really say I saw anything. We got out from that group of trees, and I kind of got down and looked at the grass, and you could see a definite path where something has walked. There was two paths coming in. You could see where it came up the draw, or up on one side of the draw, and got behind those trees, and then took off an opposite, well, kind of a right angle direction back into the woods some more. So I said, well, let's just take a look. And you could tell that the way the grass was matted down, I've tracked a lot of elk, deer, bears, cougars. I've been around them a lot. So if you look at the grass right, you can kind of tell what size of foot they have. When you're hunting deer, it just knocks down a little few blades of grass. It doesn't really leave too much of a mark, but usually you can see where their hooves hit. A bear will be a lot different. It'll be a lot wider when it mats down the grass because it's got a bigger paw. Same with a cat. So I kept following it, and as we followed it, it went right up on top of the ridge, and then I kind of lost it for a while because it hit right into the brush. So found some broken limbs and a few things, whatever, kind of just hoping I'd come to another opening, which I knew there was one. We hit another opening. You could see where it crossed it, but then it went into pretty good sized thicket. So that was pretty much it. It was I went as far as, but I'll tell you what, that whole hunting trip, I was eyeballing everywhere I went because I thought, oh my God, just to see it again, I mean, it would explain everything.
You know, the crazy thing about these Bigfoot creatures is once you know they're there, once you know they're in the woods, it totally changes your whole perspective of the woods. And unfortunately for some people, it takes that from them. And it sounds like we're able to get past that. And I'd be doing the same thing, man. I'd have been looking over my shoulder. I'd have been watching everything. I mean, it really would have, shook me up. That was a pretty scary encounter. You know, do you can you remember what color the hands were? I know you talked about how big they were, but do you remember what color they were?
They were black. They were dark. I would say black. They almost looked totally black. And the fingers, you look at your own finger and what, half inch wide or whatever. What this thing, like inch and a half wide fingers, just huge. And they were long but stubby. I mean, you know what I mean. They were longer than ours, but they kind of stubby, but they were just huge, almost like they could wrap around your neck. And
Yeah, they're huge. And I don't think that people really understand how big these creatures are until you run into one, and you kind of, you have a better perspective because it's one thing to say it or try to explain it to somebody, but once you see one and you understand how big they are, it really is something. When you were in there, and I'm the same way, I love being a dad, and I'd done whatever I had to protect my child, and I wouldn't want them to be scared either. That's kind of how I was raised, and my dad was the same way. But did you feel anything other than just the obvious signs of fear? Did you smell anything, or did you feel anything when those screams happened?
we didn't smell anything, but there wasn't any wind, and we had the fire going, and the smoke wasn't going anywhere. There was no breeze to carry the smoke. And so, we had a mid-sized campfire, and it just didn't, the smoke was just going pretty much straight up but kind of out. And I say it's because of the smoke. We were sitting pretty close to the fire. It was only probably about, I don't know, 39, 40 degrees. It wasn't warm by any means. And we were bundled up.
I kind of have this theory that I've wondered for a while that if I wonder if they can turn that smell on and off like a defense mechanism. That's just me. That's just my opinion. It makes you wonder if that's kind of what they use it for, or maybe a warning sign. I don't know, and who knows? There's no experts in this world, but that's just my opinion. But I always like to ask my guests this question because it is life changing. But how did that affect the rest of your life after you had that encounter, D?
I always started watching behind my back in the woods. Even today, I will move a little bit, stop, turn, glance, look around. And yeah, that's how it makes you. Not paranoid. I'm not saying I go out there and I'm just shaking and trying to look at everything. Uh, Hunting tactics from my grandpa. You walk a little bit, you sit. You walk a little bit, you sit. And but I'm always watching behind my back. And listening very close, because I believe, yeah, well, I believe that if they're stalking you, they are eventually going to mess up and make some noise. You can hear. I don't people realize I've been so close to elk that I've had one within inches of my face, a little calf elk. I could hear them walking up to me, walking. Now they weren't running, walk right up to me. You could hear it, and you get that sound down. And once you understand that, you can be in a clearing and you can have deer or elk walk behind you in the brush, and you can hear them just walking until they hit the opening, and you can actually hear them walk if you just listen. And that, that's what I keep doing out in the woods. I watch and I listen.
Well, that sounds like a really good plan. I mean, it's definitely a smart thing to do. But not only with Bigfoot being out there, but everything else that's out there and going on today. I totally don't understand people that just take off in the woods and they're just not paying attention at all, because you just don't know what's out there, let alone Bigfoot. But how did that affect your son? I know that had to be a very scary thing and really traumatizing. But how did that affect him?
It's amazing. Just the opposite of what you think. He goes out in the woods all the time. He's into bushcrafting, and he had a audition with that show Alone, and one of the parts you had to go out and you had to bushcraft and be someplace where nobody was and stay out there. And where he lives, it's more prominent for the Bigfoot sightings. And he's got no problem and goes right out there, bushcrafts him a little thing, and he stays out there for 5 days.
That's awesome, man. Well, that's good that it didn't take that from him. I know I talked to a lot of guys that it totally destroys their love for the woods, man. That's where I go to unplug and to pray, and that's kind of my safe spot. But one thing I will not do is I won't go at night. I go during the day, and there's certain areas I won't go. But I'm glad they didn't take that from him. What would you say, D, to somebody watching this podcast or listening to the story that is not a believer in Bigfoot? What would you say to somebody? Because I've had an encounter. I believe your encounter, and I a lot of people listen to this stuff because they're curious. But until you really see one, I know what I know and what I saw. But what would you say to somebody who's not a believer?
Listen, watch, and everything's going to happen when you least expect it. I've never seen Bigfoot before then. So I read a lot about it. I went to the library, I got books, and I read all the ones that I could find in the library. They had it under the fictional child's books. So, here's a grown man going in and reading books that supposed to be child books. But I read a lot of books on it, but I wasn't expecting it. I've spent when my son was growing up, when I was growing up, we spent more time out in the woods than we did in town. Uh, wasn't expecting it, but it was a whole different feeling. But you've got to understand that they show up when they want to. I really think that sometimes. I don't know if it's just the way I feel about it, but when you least expect it, and then all of a sudden there it is, and it was like I wasn't looking for it either. Uh, and I think they migrate through. I think they migrate through where we were at. I think the weather was changing and they're finding food.
You brought up some really good points, and it does make you wonder. That was my next question: is what do you think he was doing there, and what do you think it wanted?
I just because my experiences with the woods. Uh, I believe it was the fire. See, there wasn't anybody up there around us. We drove around that day, and there was one camp maybe a mile and a half from us. There wasn't. We were about the only ones within a mile of anybody, and uh, even with hunting, if you got cigarettes or something, smokes will attract animals. They'll come in. They'll get curious. They'll come in and see. Coyotes. Coyotes are very much, which is strange. They'll come in and check out the smoke too. We've had coyotes come right into our camp, right on the edge of camp, and all we had was a fire going. Um, I think it come up. I think it smelled the smoke and come up to see what was happening. I think it was curious.
That makes sense. I think they're very curious. They're territorial, and I think sometimes they do migrate through, whether they use cave systems or who knows. But I kind of have this theory, and I really believe that if you see one, there's another one really close by. I think they kind of are in packs. They're kind of family oriented, and I really struggle with using that word, but they run in packs and they're kind of together. And I think sometimes they they have lookouts or whatnot. But I had a guy on the show. One of my very first episodes came on. He was in New Mexico, and he said that this come around this corner and this Bigfoot creature was out right in the middle of the road on 4 feet, and it stopped and they caught it off guard, and he said this thing turned around and looked over its shoulder and whistled back behind it and then just took off. And I think it was warning the rest of them, or that's kind of what he thinks. And it's it's really interesting to me, and I love talking about this stuff, but I got to know what you think Bigfoot is, man. Being a hunter, spending all the time out in the woods, what do you think it is?
And that's a hard one. I think it's an animal. I and that's tough because I've heard a lot of theories about it being a shapeshifter, and I talked to a guy up there. One guy I talked to about it, that he's pretty much open-minded. He's kind of an artist type person, so he's kind of open-minded, and he says, well, they're shapeshifters. They turn to chipmunks, and then when they want to be Bigfoot, they turn into Bigfoot. Now, I kind of walked away from here. I didn't say anything. I just said, okay, that's your thought. That's good. But I don't know. I got the feeling that it's just an animal. It's another animal that has been around for years that is just undiscovered, or they don't want us to find out about it. One of the two. But I'm like you. I think they travel in units, family units, packs. This one's screaming. What was odd was it was coming up that draw screaming, and at different intervals, every couple hours as it was coming up. And I really think it was either warning the rest of them, or, hey, I'm up here, I'm here, I'm gonna go see what's going on. So let me just track my way up there and find out what's going on.
Well, either way, I can imagine that was really scary to hear something like that. And I hear a lot of people describe that sound that it just vibrates their chest and it's so overpowering, and I think it's because these things are just so big. But, I kind of lean towards the fact they're more than flesh and blood. But at this point, we're just taking educated guesses. Nobody really knows for sure, but I love to hear other people's opinions and, kind of find out what people think, because it's a very interesting topic, man. And I love talking about it. But
well, and like you said, that last scream, physically, it felt like pressure. It's almost like you could feel it. It wasn't only loud, but you could almost feel it. And I don't know if that was just a body reaction, or if it was actually just, it didn't make my chest vibrate, but it felt like there was a whole thing just kind of coming at you. And that's the part that I think chilled the most, was it was so loud, and then you just kind of felt, whoa, what's going on? But it felt like pressure, just kind of pressure against you. But it was, I walked it off, and that thing was it was pretty close to being only about 35 yards from us. If you hunt and everything, and 35 yards is pretty close.
Yeah, and I would venture to guess that it could get across those sort of 35 yards pretty daggum quick. I mean, if it wanted to get you, it would have got you,
Yeah, well, that's why. Well, it could have walked. It could have not screamed. It just walked across. He could have jumped across the road and had us. That's one of the main reasons. Let's get in the truck. It's like that was way too close. Way too close. I was just glad that when I turned the truck around, there was no question, on what it was. When we turned the truck around and saw that, I went, oh my God. And, I didn't say much to anybody around them, because even back then, people were looking like you were crazy. You're seeing things. You don't know what you're talking about.
That's one of the reasons I started this whole podcast, is to give people a safe platform to get that off their chest, man, because this stuff can be traumatizing. And then also, too, you know that you're not crazy, that there's other people out there that have seen stuff like you. I know with my encounter, the first time I talked to somebody that didn't look at me like I was crazy, it really helped, because I was like, okay, I'm not losing my mind. I did see what I saw, and so that does help. And they're definitely life changing experiences. And man, that was crazy. I was talking to a gentleman. Matter of fact, the last episode he came on, and there was a story in the '60s. Kind of, they weren't camping, but two ladies were driving their car in a rural area, and this Bigfoot ran out in front of them, and they stopped. And he said that this Bigfoot walked up to the car, and I guess their windows must have been down because it yanked one of the ladies by her hair and was pulling her out of the car. It was in the paper and was pulling her out of the car. And he said that her friend tried to stop it, and it reached in the other side of the car, tells you how big it is, and punched her, right? And then drug her friend off. And there was a search party, and they found her, but it makes you wonder why these things do these things and why they act the way they do. And in my opinion, they're evil. That's just me. That's kind of what I think, and I think you're fortunate to be here to share that. I think a lot of the missing 411 people are, not all of them obviously, but some of them, they have these run-ins with these creatures, and I don't know, man. It's definitely something that makes you think twice. For me, at least, going in the woods, especially at night, man, I definitely won't do that anymore. So,
Well, I know you can stop me if I'm out of line. Please do. You mentioned that the 411 missing people, and I'm with you on that. I think that some of it is Bigfoot taking them. People don't realize they're huge. They can stand beside a trail, and I swear you cannot see them. They could yank that last person off the line of people. You'd never know it. It'd be so quiet. Or someone that's getting too far ahead. They'd be done. And on the, and on the other hand, I hunted in one area that uh I probably shouldn't even say it because it's nothing to do with that. But anyway, we hunted in one area that my GPS didn't work, and I lost 3.5 hours of time and ended up on the wrong side of the dang road.
that's crazy. I don't know, man. There's a lot of weird things that go on in the woods that even like you, somebody who's a hunter, man, you can get turned around so easily. And if one of these things is watching you, you're gone, and there's not going to be anybody there to find you, or whatever. It's one of these things that once you know they're real and they're out there, it does change your life in some ways. But I know, Dee, that you have one more encounter that you wanted to talk about that happened in the same area in 2007. So why don't you tell our audience about that?
Yeah, we were me and my wife were going deer hunting, and we camped in that same area that my son and I were at. And uh, wife likes a big tent and a big everything, so we had a car cover, a tent, and all kinds of stuff out there. For two people, we looked like we had a mansion. So we got everything set up, and our tent, now it's a cabin tent, and I measured it so I exactly know the measurements. It's 12 by 12. The side of it is 6.5 feet. At the center, it's 7 to 7.5 feet. Okay, and it's got a pretty flat top. It's sloped a little bit to keep the rain off. So it's a good sized tent. Well, the first night we were out, the same thing. The woods were just dead silent. No coyotes, no nothing. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, the log trucks came through. They were logging because we were up there during the week. Uh, and that was the first night. The second night, we had us a fire. We were just talking, and it was just dead quiet again. And it was kind of odd because usually you hear the coyotes and the other things. And this is, like I said, everything went silent. Well, at that time, we had 3 dogs with us. And so she says, well, it's getting late. Let's get to bed. Well, I says, well, I'm going to throw a tarp over the top of the tent in case it rains tonight. It clouded up, and I thought, well, it might rain and just keep extra rain off. Well, I put it over the top of the tent. And of course, our tent was a 12 by 12, and I think my tarp was a 40 by 40. So you know how that goes. Kind of put it up there. Well, the wind blew a little bit and kind of blew it off to the backside of the tent. Well, I was already in the tent. I said, heck with it. If we get wet, we get wet. I'm not going to deal with it right now. And we laid down, and the dogs were just right at the end of the air mattress and kind of milling around, and got into bed. And all of a sudden, on it would be the backside, well, no, the, yeah, the front side of the tent, I heard something. And I told my wife, I says, be quiet. And if you've ever walked on a tarp, you know what it sounds like. You can hear it crunch. Okay, now I've hunted a long time. I've had a lot of experience with animals and worked on, well, I went to my grandpa's friend's cattle ranch and worked cattle. So been around a lot of things that walk. You heard it, and it went crunch, 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 and you could hear it coming right up beside the tent. And now I'm sending chills up my own spine. And you just heard it, and it went real slow. It wasn't fast, and you could hear the foot hit. You could hear the next one hit, and the next one, and that thing came all the way around the side of the tent. And I told my wife, I was just saying, shh, quiet, quiet. There's something out there. She goes, oh, it's probably an animal. I says, honey, that tarp's laying out there, God, 20 feet, and it's bipedal. There's only two legs. It's walking. She says, oh, it's probably somebody messing with us. And I said, the last thing you do is mess with a hunter with guns. You start messing with their, you're probably going to get shot. Because we were the only ones in that area, in that opening where we were, or that small open. And it worked its way all the way around to the back of the tent. Now the back of the tent was facing the woods, well, a small wooded area, and it got back there, and all three of those dogs wanted to crawl under the covers and get underneath our pillows and hide. And now to me, that was a sign it's something that's not good. If it was another person, those dogs would have been chewing the side of that tent to get out. I mean, yeah, I know my dogs. If it was human, they would have been on it. They crawled up behind us. They're clear behind us. And I had a shotgun inside with slugs in it. Kind of, that's what I use for the protection. I think slugs and buckshot, it's both. I grabbed it because now the back of the tent, you can't see through it because my wife had her little night light on, so I couldn't see any shadows, and it was cloudy. There wasn't any moonlight to glow through. So we are sitting there, and I remember it clear as day. I'm halfway laid back with the blanket just about my chest, and I'm listening, and I can hear it out there moving, but not making a lot of noise. He was just kind of standing at the back of the tent, clear on the top, about 2 inches from the middle of that cabin tent. You saw this finger come down and go like this. And it was about that big around. Scratching. You could feel it scratching and feeling oh shit. I sat up in bed, and she goes, wait. And I said, no, it's right there. So of course I thought, well, it's going to be one of two things. It's either going to know the sound of a shotgun or it's going to know something else. I grabbed the shotgun and I racked one in, and that thing instantly, you could hear it run. Boom, 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 boom. And I looked at my wife, and she says, maybe you should go after it. And I says, You know something, honey? If I had somebody that was there to back me up, I would go after it. But I don't want to be the next one to have them say, "Oh, a cougar got a hold of somebody." They'd call it a cougar kill or something. They'd make it up excuse. So that night I says, "What are the odds 10 years later having something else happen at about the same at hunting seasons, run the same time every year, usually most of the time. And 10 years later having another incident, this time with my wife, and we got up the next morning, we did our little bit of hunting, and I came back and I says, I gotta see something. So I went to the back of the tent. I reached my arm up over, and I mean, I could just get it over the side of the tent, let alone dead center. So then I went over and I grabbed a pine limb that was laying there, bent over, and I reached up there and I says, get in the tent and see if it looked like this. So I took the pine, the limb and rubbed it on it. She says, not even close. She says, you can see it, but it's just coming down. It's not moving back and forth. And I said, that's what I thought. I says, and I looked for tracks, but like I said, I could see the knocked down grass, but I couldn't see tracks. The only thing I did notice, there's a fence that goes behind there, a barbed wire fence. And the way the trees are set up along the fence, there's small openings. But the fence, when I looked at it, I go, well, that's odd because all the dead limbs, lower dead limbs in one section of that fence are all busted off up to, I don't know, 12 feet high. And I thought, what's the chances of a squirrel or something else going up and knocking off those limbs? We all know what it was. And I tried to look for hair or something. I was really starting to get into it, and there's so much moss. There's that black moss that grows on the trees down here on the pine trees, and so I mean, if there was a hair, I wouldn't have been able to probably to tell it between the moss and the hair. But that was the. I mean, what are the chances at the same spot 10 years later?
What in the world, man? That is wild. Absolutely wild. And I know that we said that they migrate through, but it makes me wonder if that was the same one, man. Maybe it was migrating at the same time. Maybe they go through that area at the same time every year and you just happen to be there. But it makes you wonder what in the world it was, why it was scratching on your tent like that. Why do that kind of stuff?
I don't know, except I know I've seen different people talk about it that they get curious and it's the feel of that nylon.
That's wild, man. Well, listen, if you go camping back there again, let me know. You're a braver person than I am because I wouldn't have been able to sleep that night. I'd have been gone. But man, that is absolutely wild, and it makes you wonder. It really does. That's got to be the same one that was in that area, or maybe a family of them. I don't know.
Well, it's that curiosity killed the cat. I just can't be so curious about things. But I've never been afraid of the woods either. Uh, I'm like you. Like if you told me, he says, "Well, why don't you just go up there and spend 4 days with a tent and a fire?" I'd look at you and say, "No, no, I won't. I'll go up there in my camper and I'll stay in my camper, but I'm not staying in a tent no more."
I don't blame you, man. I'd be the same way. I could do a camper, but knowing that thing's there and that's happened to you twice, I definitely wouldn't do that at all. That's pretty crazy, man. And I'm glad that you were able to overcome the fear with these things and still enjoy the woods and still get out and hunt. But thanks for sharing that, man. That was pretty amazing. And well, I do have one question. Does your wife still go camping with you after that?
Oh yeah, yeah. It didn't bother her a bit. Of course, I don't. She doesn't believe in Bigfoot like I do. So,
Yeah, no, I understand how that is. My wife's the same way, so I get it.
but the one thing I did ever since we've been up there and all this happened, I bought trail cams and I put them up around the the camp and the tent and stuff just to try to capture a picture Never had it happen again after that.
I think they know somehow. I think they know. I don't know how that works and any of that. That's just my guess, but pretty crazy stuff, man. I appreciate you sharing that. If you see something in the future, man, or if you have another encounter or something out there in that area, man, get a hold of me, let me know. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. Well,
thanks for being here, man. Guys, thank you for being here and being part of this podcast. That was a really incredible story. I know you guys enjoyed that, and I love doing this. I love hearing these encounters and having people on the show, and I love just being able to bring you guys these stories. And so if you have a story or an encounter you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at video@jazzcreativear.com. And like I always say, stay prayed up. We'll see you in the next episode.